In this video, we're going to start wiring up that users class we created, and to kick things off, we're going to wire up the people list, which means that we need to do something when a user joins right here and when a user leaves. We want to keep that list up to date, and every time we update it, we want to give a fresh copy of the list to the client, which means that the server is going to need to emit an event to the client. The client is then going to listen for that event, and it's going to update the markup. Now we can view exactly where this is going to happen by starting up the server with nodemon server/server.js. Then I'm going to head over to localhost 3000 and open up a chat page. Display name Andrew, room name Lord of the Rings. Now, once we're in here, we have our people list. Currently, it should show us since we are in the room, and when a new user joins, it should automatically show that user. Right now, none of this is happening, but with our new event in place, it's all gonna happen. Now, the first thing we're going to do is figure out exactly what this event is going to look like. Over inside of chat.js, we can add a listener, figuring out what works for us. What does the client really need to get this done? Then we can go ahead and wire up the server to fulfill those needs. Right here inside of chat.js, somewhere down below, just below disconnect, we're going to add a new listener. Socket.on, and we're going to listen for a brand new event. This one is going to be called update user list. Now, update user list is going to need to get past some information. We're going to need the list of users to show instead of the currently displayed ones, which means we're going to expect one argument, a users array. And this users array is going to just be an array of names, exactly like what we return from getUserList over inside of the users class. Back inside of chat.js, for the moment, all we're going to do is log the list to the screen when it comes through. Console.log users list, and the second argument will be the actual users array. Awesome. Once we have this wired up, all we need to do is add some jQuery to update the DOM. The harder part is going to be getting a updated and up-to-date list back to the client. Over inside of server.js, step one to that process is going to be to import the class that we've been working so hard to create. Currently, we do not use it up above. I'm going to go ahead and get this done. Just below where we load in Israel string, we can make a constant. And I'm going to go ahead and pull off the users property, which is the one we export at the bottom of users.js. And we can import that using require. I'm going to require the local file // it's in the utils directory, and this one is called users. Perfect. Now that we have users in place, we can make a new instance of it. This is going to be the users instance we use down below. We need a way to run these methods. So right here, below our IO variable, we can make a new variable called users, setting it equal to new users, just like this. Now we're going to be able to call all of our user methods to add, remove, fetch, and otherwise manipulate that data. The first step in the process is going to be to add a user to the list when they join a chat room. We can do that right after our call to socket.join. I'm going to remove the old comments, although you can choose to keep yours around if you find they are a good reference. Just below socket.join, we're going to call users.addUser, adding our brand new user. And we need to pass in those three pieces of information. The socket ID, socket.id is where that's stored. The name, that's on params.name. And finally, we're going to go ahead and pass in the room name, params.room. Awesome. Now, as you notice, this code is not supposed to run if there is a validation error, meaning that the name or the room name is not provided, but currently that's not the case. Right here, we don't actually stop the function execution. I'm going to use return to make sure none of the code down below ever fires if the data is not valid. Perfect. The next step in the process is going to be to make sure that there is already no user with this ID. I'm going to call users.remove user to get that done, passing in the only argument it requires, the socket ID, just like this. That means that user joins the room, then we remove them from any potential previous rooms, and finally we add them to the new one. Now that we have this in place, we can actually go ahead and emit that event. We're going to emit the event the client expects, update user list with the users array. If we don't emit the event, the client's never going to get the new list, and we just updated the list. So we definitely want them to get a fresh copy. This means we want to emit an event to everyone in the chat room. Just as we had in our comments earlier, that gets done via io.to. We're going to pass in the room name, and then we're going to call emit, emitting the event. Now we can go ahead and fill out to first. We want to pass in the room name. Params.room has that information. And next up, we want to emit the event. The event name, as we just defined over in chat.js, is update user list. And the last thing we need to do is get the user list. We already have that. Users.get user list, passing in the name of the room we want to get the list for. Once again, params.room. That's going to be the only argument we pass in. With this call in place, we should be able to actually view this over inside of the terminal. I'm going to save this file, which is going to restart the server, and over inside of the browser, I can open up the developer tools to view the console log statements, and I'm going to give the app a refresh. If I do refresh the application, what do we see? We see a users list right here, and we have Andrew printing twice. We'll talk about why in just a second. If I refresh the page for a second time, what do we have? We have Andrew printing 3 times. As you can see, this is happening because we're not removing users from the list when they leave the chat application. That's the second goal in this video. We currently have a user list. All we need to do is update it when a user leaves as well. That's going to happen inside of Atom down near the bottom in the disconnect listener. Right here, we want to remove the user, and then we want to update the list once again. I'm going to do that by doing a few separate things. First up, we're going to make a variable called user, storing any potentially removed users. Remember, the remove user method does return the user removed. Users.remove user, passing in the ID, socket.id. Now we only want to do something if we actually removed a user. If the person hadn't joined a room, there's no reason to actually do anything. If a user was removed, we are going to emit 2 events, and we're going to emit them to every single person connected to the chat room, which means that we're going to be using io.to.emit, just like we did up above. We're going to do this 2 times, so I'm going to copy this line and paste it down below. The first one is going to update the user list, and the second one is going to print a little message like Andrew has left the room. The first one is going to take the user room property as the only argument. User.room stores the room string. We're going to provide that for both, and now we can start emitting our events. I'm going to emit the update user list event first, right here, inside of quotes, update user list, and we're going to go ahead and call the exact same method we did right up above. Users.getUserList, passing in the room. User.room. Now when someone leaves a room, they're going to be removed from that list, and we're not going to see those duplicates that we had over inside of the web developer console. The next thing that we want to do is emit a message. We're going to emit a message from the admin to everybody, kind of like we did up above. We greeted the user and we told all other users that someone joined. Right here, we're going to emit new message, and we're going to call generate message like we've done in the past. We're going to pass in those 2 arguments. The first one is admin. This is going to be an admin message. And the second one can be a template string. We're going to inject the user's name, user.name, and then we're going to say that user has left. Perfect. Now that we have this in place, everything should be working as expected. Hopefully over inside of Chrome, we no longer get those duplicates. I'm going to give the page a refresh, and what do we see? We have a users list with just one user, Andrew. If I refresh the page, we no longer get the duplicates because when I leave, I get removed, and when I come back, when the page finally finishes refreshing, I get added. Now the same thing is going to be true if I add a new user. For the moment, I'm going to switch the browser to just take up half the width on my screen. I know it's a little cramped, we'll only be here for a second. And I'm going to open up a second tab and drag that to the other half so we can view both of these side by side. I'm also going to open up the developer tools for this second tab, and we're going to join the exact same room. Let's go to localhost 3000. I'm going to join as Mike, and the room name is going to be the same, LOTR. Now, as soon as I click join, I should see an updated list in both consoles. I'm going to click join. Right here, we get Andrew Mike, and right here, we also have Andrew Mike which is fantastic. I also get a little message saying Mike has joined. That was in place earlier. The real test is what happens when a user leaves. I'm going to kick Andrew out of the chat room. And over here inside of our other chat window, we have Andrew has left printing to the screen, and we have our new user list with just one user, Mike. This is fantastic. We're now keeping track of users as they come and go, which lets us do really cool things like printing custom messages and updating the people list. The last thing to get done is to actually render the names to the screen. Instead of just printing them in the console, we want to go ahead and take these names and add them to the list. That's going to happen over inside of our event listener. We're going to use jQuery like we have in the past. Right here, we're going to do something with those users. First up, let's go ahead and make a new jQuery element. We're going to make a variable called UL. This is going to store a new element using jQuery. We're going to create an unordered list. We can actually create an ordered list since this is an ordered list of users. That's an OL as opposed to a UL. Right here, we'll create that OL tag. Awesome. Now we need to iterate over every user doing something with that user. Users.forEach is going to let us get that done. Right here, we're going to pass in our function, and inside of that function, we can add the individual user. The argument for the function is the name. This is the user string, and all we're going to do is append something to our ordered list up above. That's going to be ol.append. Now, what exactly do we want to append? Well, we want to append a list item. The list item is going to have a text property equal to the name, and that's going to get everything rendering just right. Right here, we can use jQuery to create a new list item by opening and closing our list item tag. Then, right after the closing parentheses for jQuery, we are going to call text so we can safely set the text property equal to the user's name. Now we have an updated list, but it's not actually getting rendered to the screen. The last step is to render it by adding it to the DOM. Now over inside of chat.html, we do have a place for that. It's this div right here with an ID of users, which means that we can select it, jQuery. The selector is going to start with the hash sign since we're selecting by ID and we're selecting users. Then we can go ahead and actually add the list. I'm going to set the HTML property equal to our ordered list up above, as opposed to using append. We don't want to update a list. We want to completely wipe the list, replacing it with the new version. Now we can save chat.js and test things out. Over inside of the browser, I'm going to go ahead and close the console, refresh the page, and what do we see? We see the number 1 followed by Mike. Now, number 1 is coming from the fact that we're using an ordered list. If I add a second user, we're going to see that second user. Let's create a second user. We're going to give it a display name of Jen. Then we'll go to the same room, LOTR, and when we join, what do we get? We get a little message and we get our 2 users, and the same thing is showing up over here. Now I'm going to go to the second tab and I'm going to close the first. When I do that, the list automatically updates, and we also get our message saying that Mike has left, and this is fantastic. With this in place, we are one step closer to being complete. The messages are still going to everybody. They're not specific to the room, but that is something we're going to take care of in the next video. For now, we are done. I am going to make a commit. It has been a little while, and we do have a completed feature. So let's go ahead and do that. First up, we'll run git status. We have some new files as well as some existing ones. I'll be using git add to add all of those to the next commit. Finally, we can use git commit to actually make the commit. I'm going to use the M flag to add our message, and right inside of quotes, add users class and update user list event. Perfect. We can go ahead and make this commit and push it up to GitHub. Feel free to push to Heroku if you want. I'm going to hold off a little bit longer. Everything should be working there as well as locally. In the next video, we're going to be making sure those messages, whether it's a text message or a location message, only get sent to the people in the room. That's coming up next, so stay tuned. I will see you then.